Here is a strange fact about the largest rainforest on Earth. After 5 centuries of explorers, 500 years of maps, and 40 years of satellites precise enough to count individual trees from orbit, nobody actually knows how many people live inside it. Somewhere in that green ocean, there are still human beings who have never been counted, named, or found. In an age when every square meter of this planet has been photographed, mapped, and priced, the Amazon remains the one place on Earth where a person can simply vanish into the blank space on the map and still be real. That should not be possible anymore. It is. So what is the Amazon really? Not a rainforest, not even quite a river. 9 countries share its borders and cannot agree on what to do with it. Millions of indigenous descendants live inside it and were never asked. It is not a wilderness in the way the word is normally used. Untouched, empty, waiting. It is something closer to an unfinished argument, still being fought in real time, about who owns the last of the world's rivers, forests, and silence. This is the story of that argument, and of the last wilderness large enough to still hide both the deepest human isolation left on the planet and its fastest human destruction. The numbers alone should stop you. The Amazon basin covers roughly 7 million square kilometers, nearly twice the size of the Congo Basin, the next largest rainforest system on Earth. Its river discharges more water into the ocean than the next 7 largest rivers on the planet combined, close to 1/5 of all the fresh water that reaches the sea from anywhere on Earth. It holds an estimated 10% of every species known to science. And after 150 years of chainsaws, cattle, gold, and fire, roughly 80% of it is still standing. Whether that number holds, that is the whole story. Even the borders are not finished. The Amazon basin is shared today by 9 countries: Brazil, Peru, Colombia, Bolivia, Ecuador, Venezuela, Guyana, Suriname, and French Guiana. Most of those lines were drawn by European colonial powers who never set foot in the territory they were dividing, on maps assembled from guesswork, missionary reports, and rivers nobody had actually traced to their source. For 2 centuries, the argument over exactly where those lines belonged has occasionally turned into open war. The most recent one began on January 26, 1995, in a stretch of cloud forest along the Cenepa River, where Ecuador and Peru had disputed the exact course of their shared border since both countries' founding in the 1800s. Ecuadorian troops had quietly fortified high ground inside territory Peru considered its own. When Peruvian patrols discovered the outposts, both governments mobilized. For 34 days, 2 modern air forces fought each other over a patch of jungle smaller than the city of Washington, D.C. Jet fighters, surface-to-air missiles, and artillery, all deployed to settle a line on a map that 19th century surveyors had simply gotten wrong. Officially, 94 soldiers died. The war ended in a ceasefire brokered by the United States, Brazil, Argentina, and Chile, and it took 3 more years of negotiation before both countries finally signed a permanent peace agreement in 1998, a century and a half after the original dispute began, and decades after 90% of the border had already been mapped and agreed upon. The remaining unmapped fraction, some 78 kilometers of mountain ridge nobody had bothered to survey properly, was enough to get 94 people killed. It is worth sitting with that fact for a moment. In the same decade that satellites could photograph a single tree from orbit, 2 nations went to war because a paper map from the 1940s did not agree with the mountains it claimed to describe. The Amazon does not just resist being fully explored. It resists on some fundamental level, being fully agreed upon. And the cost of that disagreement, here as everywhere else in its history, was paid first by soldiers and would later be paid by the forest itself. Start at the water, because everything here begins and ends with it. Near the city of Manaus, two rivers meet and refuse to mix. The Rio Negro runs black, stained the color of strong tea by the tannins of 100,000 square kilometers of decaying leaves. The Solimões runs pale and sediment-heavy, carrying the ground bones of the Andes down from Peru. Where they collide, the two currents run side by side for nearly 6 kilometers. Different temperatures, different densities, different speeds, before the forest finally forces them into one river and one name, the Amazon. It is the only river on Earth with no bridge crossing it, not once, along its entire length, somewhere between 6,400 and 7,000 kilometers long. Even its exact length is disputed, because nobody entirely agrees where it begins in the high Andes. It carries an average of roughly 209,000 cubic meters of water every second into the Atlantic. At its mouth, it pushes fresh water more than 400 kilometers out into open ocean, staining the sea brown long before a ship ever sights land. Sailors called it the Sweet Sea for a reason. You could drink from the Atlantic here, miles from shore, and taste no salt at all. Twice a year, the river breathes. In flood season, water levels at Manaus rise and fall by as much as 12 meters, drowning a stretch of forest the size of England and turning treetops into islands. Fishermen paddle canoes between branches where jaguars slept months before. This is not a river with a floodplain. This is a floodplain with a river running through it, on a schedule the forest has kept for millions of years, long before anyone was here to measure it. Twice a day near the river's mouth, incoming Atlantic tides collide with the outgoing current to produce the pororoca, a standing wave that can reach 4 meters high and travel more than 800 kilometers upstream, swallowing riverbank and startling Cayman as it passes. Hydrologists have also mapped something stranger still. Deep beneath the visible river, a slow-moving body of groundwater, roughly 6,000 kilometers long, nicknamed by some researchers a hidden river in its own right, that may function as a kind of underground twin to the water flowing on the surface above it. Even now, this river is still capable of surprising the people who have spent entire careers studying it. Millions of people still organize their entire lives around that twice-yearly breath. Along the river's countless tributaries, ribeirinho communities, the river people, build their houses on stilts or directly onto rafts, so that an entire village can simply rise and fall with the water rather than fight it. Doctors and teachers travel by boat, sometimes on boats that are themselves the clinic or the classroom, moving from settlement to settlement because no road will ever reach some of these places, and because, for now, nobody involved particularly wants one to. Why does a river matter this much to the story of a forest? Because in the Amazon, the river does not just drain the rain, it makes it. 10 or 11 million years ago, none of this existed. The Amazon basin was an inland sea, then a vast, swampy freshwater lake, hemmed in by the rising wall of the Andes to the west. For millions of years, the water here drained the wrong way, westward, toward the Pacific, until the mountains finally blocked it completely and forced it to reverse. Slowly, a lake became a river flowing east instead of west, and the river began carrying nutrients and sediment across an entire continent, and the forest that would become the largest on Earth began, quite literally, to grow out of an ancient seabed. Marine fossils have since been found deep in the interior of the modern rainforest, stranded proof that the ocean was here first, and the trees came later, growing up out of ground that used to be seafloor. What makes that forest strange is that it partly makes its own weather. Trees here pull water up from the soil and release it back into the air through their leaves, in a process called transpiration. Billions of trees doing this continuously, lifting entire rivers' worth of moisture into the sky. Scientists call the result flying rivers, vast, invisible currents of water vapor moving west to east across the basin, rising, cooling, falling as rain, and rising again. Somewhere between 1/4 and half of all the rain that falls on the Amazon has already fallen once before, somewhere else in the same forest, days or weeks earlier. This is why the Amazon is not simply the largest forest on the planet. It is the most self-sustaining one. Cut down enough of it, and you are not just losing trees. You are switching off part of the machine that makes its own rain. Ecologists have a phrase for what happens next, and we will come back to it before this story ends: the tipping point. For now, it is enough to know that the forest and the water are not separate stories here. They are the same story, told twice. 10% of every species on Earth calls this basin home. More than 1,400 species of mammal, some 1,500 species of bird, close to 3,000 species of fish, more than swim in the entire Atlantic Ocean. The forest is still, quite literally, being discovered. On average, researchers announce a previously unknown species of plant or animal somewhere in the Amazon roughly every other day, a rate of discovery unmatched by any other ecosystem on the planet. Even now, in an age when most of the rest of the natural world has already been catalogued, more than 70% of all the jaguars left on Earth live inside this one forest. Something close to 400 distinct indigenous peoples call the Amazon home today, speaking somewhere in the neighborhood of 300 separate languages, many of them spoken nowhere else on the planet, and, in a few cases, by only a handful of living people. In Brazil alone, more than 800,000 indigenous people across over 300 distinct ethnic groups live within its borders, more than half of them inside the Amazon. The forest itself is not one habitat, but several, stacked vertically, like floors in a building nobody designed. Life in the emergent layer, where the tallest trees break through the canopy into open sky, has almost nothing in common with life on the permanently shaded forest floor 60 meters below, where so little direct sunlight reaches the ground that an entire ecosystem has adapted to live in near darkness, recycling nutrients from fallen leaves faster than almost anywhere else on Earth. Most of the Amazon's fabled biodiversity does not live at eye level at all. It lives in the canopy, in a world most human visitors to this forest have, in 5 centuries, still never actually seen. And beneath the tree canopy, in the deep shade where sunlight rarely reaches the forest floor, an even older story was already being written by human hands, long before any European ever saw this river. Here is the myth the word wilderness tells about the Amazon, and here is why it is wrong. For centuries, European explorers described this forest as untouched, a green void, empty of history, waiting to be discovered. It was never that. Archaeologists have spent the last several decades finding something the myth left no room for: earthworks, causeways, fish weirs, and enormous stretches of unusually dark, fertile soil, terra preta, black earth, created deliberately, over centuries, by indigenous farmers, enriching the notoriously thin Amazonian topsoil with charcoal, pottery, and organic waste. Some of these black earth deposits run several meters deep and stretch across hundreds of hectares, far richer in nutrients than any naturally occurring Amazonian soil. And centuries after the people who built them were gone, farmers in parts of the modern Amazon still deliberately seek out these ancient plots to plant on, using a fertility their ancestors could not have explained by name, but clearly already understood. Entire regions of the Amazon that look to modernize like pristine primary forest are increasingly understood by researchers as abandoned orchards and gardens, forests reshaped, planted, and managed by human beings for thousands of years before anyone in Europe knew this continent existed. Some historians argue that pre-Columbian populations across the basin may have numbered in the millions, organized into complex, sometimes densely settled societies along the region's major rivers. The exact figures remain disputed among scholars. What is not disputed is the scale of what came after. European contact in the 16th century did not conquer the Amazon so much as it emptied it. Waves of introduced disease, smallpox, measles, influenza, illnesses the indigenous immune system had never encountered, swept through river communities faster than any explorer ever could, killing an estimated majority of the region's population within a few generations. Villages emptied, fields went fallow. The forest grew back over causeways and orchards until it looked, to the next generation of travelers, exactly like wilderness always had. The silence Europeans found in the Amazon was not the sound of an empty land. It was the sound of a catastrophe already finished. The Amazon was never empty. It was only unmapped. That single mistake, reading emptiness where there was only absence, would repeat itself for the next 400 years, each time with a new excuse and a new commodity. The next one arrived wearing rubber boots. The year is 1876. An English botanist named Henry Wickham smuggles roughly 70,000 rubber tree seeds out of Brazil in violation of a national ban on their export and delivers them to British colonies in Southeast Asia. Within a generation, plantation rubber grown from those stolen seeds will outproduce the wild Amazon and end its first great boom. But for the 3 decades in between, while the world's automobiles, telephones, and factories all suddenly needed rubber, and only the Amazon could supply it, the forest becomes one of the most profitable and most murderous places on Earth. The wealth was real. In Manaus, a city carved out of jungle 1,000 miles from the ocean, rubber barons built an opera house lit by electric light before large parts of many European capitals were, and reportedly shipped their laundry across the Atlantic to be cleaned in Europe. That opera house still stands today, inside a city that has already reinvented its economy at least once, since, as a duty-free manufacturing zone established in the 1960s that remains one of the largest urban economies in the entire Amazon basin. Manaus, it turns out, has always been better at surviving its own booms than the forest around it has. The cruelty behind that wealth was also real, and in the Putumayo River Basin, territory disputed between Peru and Colombia, it became one of the worst atrocities of the 20th century that almost nobody today has heard of. The year is 1907. A rubber baron named Julio Cesar Arana controls roughly 40 estates across the Putumayo, extracting latex through a system of forced indigenous labor, enforced with the whip, the stocks, and the gun. Quotas were fixed. Failure to meet them was punished with flogging, mutilation, or execution. An Irish diplomat named Roger Casement, who had already investigated and exposed atrocities in Belgian-controlled Congo, was sent to Putumayo in 1910 and confirmed, in exhaustive, horrifying detail, what an American engineer named Walter Hardenberg had already reported to a London magazine: systematic torture, starvation, and murder carried out for rubber quotas on a British registered company's own books. Casement's 1912 report to Parliament put a number on the region's collapse. The indigenous population of the Putumayo fell from an estimated 50,000 people in 1890 to around 6,000 by 1920. Roughly 9 in every 10 people were gone. Almost none of Arana's employees ever faced justice. Arana himself later served in the Peruvian Senate. Casement, tragically, would be hanged for treason in Ireland only a few years later, for an entirely different cause. Historians estimate that across the wider Putumayo rubber region, as many as 100,000 indigenous people died over roughly 3 decades, from violence, disease, and starvation combined. Though because so few outside observers ever entered the territory while the killing was underway, no one will ever know the true number with any confidence. The Putumayo genocide remains, even now, one of history's least remembered crimes against humanity, committed not for ideology, but for tires. If the first boom was built on forced labor, the second was built on something almost more American: pure, well-funded overconfidence. And it, too, would end in the forest closing back over what people had built. In 1927, the automobile magnate Henry Ford, worried that British and Dutch plantations in Asia controlled the rubber his factories depended on, struck a deal with the Brazilian government for a concession of land along the Tapajós River, roughly the size of Delaware, and set out to build his own supply from scratch. He called it Fordlandia. It would have a hospital, a power plant, a golf course, a cinema, a library, and rows of neat white clapboard houses, an entire slice of small-town Michigan, transplanted into the heart of the Amazon. Ford never once visited it. He also never consulted a single botanist. His crews planted rubber trees in dense, orderly rows, the way you would plant corn, which, in the wild, rubber trees never grow in, because that density is exactly what protects them from the pests and blight that stalk them in their native forest. Within a few years, leaf blight and caterpillar infestations tore through the plantation. Malaria spread through the workforce. Ford tried to impose an American schedule, an American diet, and a strict ban on alcohol on his Brazilian employees, who did not appreciate any of it. In December 1930, workers rioted, smashing windows and overturning vehicles. For 3 days, the settlement Ford had built to showcase orderly, wholesome American industry became a scene of open revolt, until company guards and, eventually, Brazilian federal troops restored control. Ford relocated the operation to a second site, Belterra, and tried again, this time with actual agronomists. It still failed. By the time synthetic rubber made the entire project commercially irrelevant, Ford had spent roughly $20 million, nearly $350 million in today's money, and not one drop of Fordlandia's latex ever reached a single Ford tire. In 1945, his grandson sold both sites back to the Brazilian government for $250,000, a rounding error against what had been spent. For decades afterward, Fordlandia sat half abandoned, its water tower and hospital slowly disappearing under vines, the Amazon's oldest and strangest kind of monument. Not to what humanity built here, but to what it could not force the forest to become. As recently as this year, a Brazilian federal court has ordered the site preserved as a heritage landmark, nearly a century after Ford's rubber trees failed to grow. The forest, it turns out, remembers longer than the men who tried to tame it. Two failed empires, a century apart, taught the same lesson and were both ignored. The Amazon does not surrender to a plan. It waits the plan out. But the next assault on the forest would not come from a single obsessive businessman. It would come from an entire government, with bulldozers and a national highway. In 1972, Brazil's military dictatorship broke ground on the Trans-Amazonian Highway, a road meant to cut clean across the width of the forest and, in the government's own language, settle the Amazon before someone else claimed it. For nearly 2 centuries, the river had been the only real road into this forest. Whole regions of the interior had stayed roadless and largely intact, simply because there was no way to reach them. That changed within a decade. Roads meant settlers. Settlers meant clearing. Clearing, followed by more roads branching off the first one, produced a pattern visible even from space today. A herringbone, a fishbone sprawl of side roads, stripping the forest bare in stripes, radiating outward from every new highway like a wound that will not close. The human cost of that expansion is still being counted. During the dictatorship years, more than 8,000 indigenous people were killed in massacres, forced evictions, and epidemics connected to road construction and land seizure. A toll historians increasingly describe using the same word applied to the region 4 centuries earlier. The pattern of highways feeding deforestation gave the region a name still used by scientists today: the arc of deforestation, a crescent of cleared and degraded land curling along the southern and eastern edge of the forest through the states of Rondônia, Mato Grosso, and Pará, where nearly all of the Amazon's modern destruction has concentrated ever since. The arc of deforestation was not the only front where this forest's remaining edges were under pressure. 1,000 kilometers to the northwest, in a remote territory the arc had not yet reached, an entirely different kind of danger was already closing in on the people trying to hold that same boundary from the other direction. On June 5, 2022, a British journalist named Dom Phillips and a Brazilian indigenous rights expert named Bruno Pereira set out by boat through the Javari Valley, the second largest indigenous territory in Brazil, an expanse of forest twice the size of Switzerland, home to an estimated 17 isolated groups and, not coincidentally, one of the most lawless drug trafficking corridors on the entire South American continent. That corridor has grown more organized, not less, in recent years. Investigators tracking the killings and the wider crime economy along the Javari have pointed to the growing involvement of large, transnational criminal organizations, the same networks that dominate cocaine trafficking routes elsewhere on the continent, now using the region's rivers and remoteness to move product toward Europe and Asia. Bruno Pereira's investigation into illegal fishing was, in that light, never really just about fish. It was about which armed groups controlled which stretch of river and what else moved along it after dark. Phillips was researching a book about protecting the Amazon. Pereira, a former head of Brazil's Uncontacted Peoples Department, was investigating illegal fishing operations encroaching on protected indigenous land. Neither man came home. 2 brothers were arrested within days. One confessed and led police to the buried bodies. It took Brazilian federal police until November 2024, 2.5 years later, to formally indict the alleged mastermind behind the killings, a man known locally as Colombia, along with 8 others. As of this year, none of the accused has yet stood trial. Phillips's unfinished manuscript was eventually completed by fellow journalists and indigenous contributors and published this year under the title How to Save the Amazon. One of the people who helped finish it was a prominent indigenous leader named Beto Marubo, who spoke to reporters in Sao Paulo this past October, 3 years after the killings, about whether anything had actually changed in the Javari Valley since. The forces behind the killings, he said, drug trafficking and a rising tide of invasions onto indigenous land, were still exactly the same. Asked directly whether Phillips and Pereira would be safe there today, his answer left no room for comfort. They would, he said, be killed again. It is not that nothing has been done. Between June 2023 and March 2025, a federally backed territorial protection plan carried out 42 raids across the Javari Valley, resulting in 97 arrests and roughly $5 million in fines. Indigenous communities themselves have gone further still. In 2023, under Marubo's direction, the Union of Indigenous Peoples of the Javari Valley formed its own vigilance force, more than 100 local patrollers monitoring the territory's rivers and waterways on behalf of a state that could no longer be relied on to do it consistently. We had no choice, Marubo said of the decision. If we didn't act, we'd have lost our resources. It is a striking admission. The same communities the government is meant to protect have had to build a parallel government of their own, just to keep the first one honest. But protection, in this part of the Amazon, has always been provisional, funded in good years, hollowed out in bad ones, contingent on whichever government happens to be in Brasilia. Phillips and Pereira are not this story's only names. In the same conversation, Marubo mentioned 2 others who died defending this same forest years earlier. Chico Mendes, a rubber tapper turned union organizer, murdered in 1988, and Dorothy Stang, an American-born nun, murdered in 2005. The list, in other words, was already long before 2022. It has simply kept growing. 300 kilometers to the north, in a different indigenous territory, an entirely different kind of violence was unfolding at the exact same time, quieter, slower, and measured not in bullets, but in mercury. The Yanomami territory is Brazil's largest indigenous land, nearly 10 million hectares along the Venezuelan border, home to roughly 30,000 people, including several isolated communities of its own. For decades, it has also concealed some of the richest gold deposits in the Amazon, and for just as long, illegal miners, known in Brazil as garimpeiros, have treated that fact as an invitation. The year is 2022. An estimated 20,000 illegal miners occupy Yanomami land, nearly matching the indigenous population itself, tolerated by a presidential administration that favored them over the indigenous population it was constitutionally obligated to protect. Mercury used to separate gold from river sediment has poisoned the fish the Yanomami depend on for food. Malaria cases, spread from miners to villagers by mosquitoes, have risen more than 7-fold in less than a decade. Deaths from malnutrition are up roughly 330%, most of the dead children. International photographs of Yanomami infants, starved to the bone, are being compared by journalists to the worst famine imagery of the 20th century. The year is 2025. New mining deforestation inside Yanomami territory, which peaked at roughly 1,800 hectares in 2022, has fallen to just 45 hectares, a decline of well over 90% in 3 years, following a sustained military and police operation launched in January 2023. More than 6,000 Yanomami patients have been treated at reopened health posts inside the territory. In the state capital, Boa Vista, most of a group of severely malnourished children admitted to hospital have gained enough weight to be reclassified out of the most dangerous category of malnutrition, a small, unglamorous, thoroughly bureaucratic-sounding statistic that also happens to mean, for each of those specific children, that they lived. A Yanomami health leader named Junior Hekurari, who spent years watching his community bury its children, told reporters that his people have got up again. They've recovered, now that communities too weak to farm through the worst of the crisis are growing bananas and cassava again. The recovery is real, and it is fragile. Hundreds of miners remain, and researchers warn they migrate rather than disappear. The same crackdown that drove them out of Yanomami land has already pushed some deeper into Amapá State, where a mining camp was recently discovered within a single kilometer of the Amazon's second tallest known tree, an 88-meter red angelim, estimated at 400 to 600 years old, alone capable of absorbing as much carbon as an entire hectare of surrounding forest. Every crackdown in the Amazon, it turns out, produces the same two-part story: a real, hard-won recovery in one place, and a quiet, undocumented expansion somewhere else the cameras have not yet reached. The pink river dolphin, known locally as the boto, is the largest freshwater dolphin species on Earth and can turn a deeper shade of pink as it ages, some individuals reaching a color close to sunset by adulthood. River folklore across the basin holds that the boto can shapeshift into a handsome stranger at night, seduce a young woman at a riverside festival, and slip back into the water by dawn, a myth researchers believe may exist specifically to explain unaccounted-for pregnancies in isolated communities. Overhead, the harpy eagle, one of the largest and most powerful raptors alive, plucks monkeys and sloths directly out of the high canopy, with talons longer than a grizzly bear's claws. None of these animals evolved to survive a mining camp. The jaguar and the pink river dolphin in particular, the Amazon's two great keystone species, whose ranges stretch across national borders and stitch together the health of the entire basin, depend on exactly this kind of unbroken, uncontaminated river corridor to survive at all. Poison one stretch of river, and the damage does not stay local. It travels, the same way the water does. Mercury and gold are not the only currency driving this forest's disappearance. Long before any garimpero ever arrived here, a much larger, far more mundane economic logic had already redrawn the map of who owns the Amazon and why. Since the 1970s, the single largest driver of deforestation in the Amazon has not been logging, gold, or even the roads that first made all of it reachable. It has been cattle. Ranching alone accounts for roughly 2/3 to 3/4 of all forest permanently converted to other use in the Brazilian Amazon since record-keeping began, more than every other cause combined. Soybean farming, a more recent arrival, has expanded by several 100% in some Amazonian states over the past 2 decades, driven by global demand for animal feed half a world away. For years, one of the few real checks on that expansion was a voluntary agreement among major grain traders, known as the Soy Moratorium, in which companies pledged not to purchase soy grown on newly deforested Amazon land. It worked reasonably well for nearly 2 decades. In early 2026, several Amazonian states quietly stripped tax incentives from companies still honoring it, and some of the world's largest soy traders responded by announcing plans to walk away from the agreement entirely. A reminder that most of the protections holding this forest together are not laws, they are promises made by companies that can be withdrawn as easily as they were given. Not every economic story here ends that way. In the far western state of Acre, a rubber tapper and union organizer named Chico Mendez spent the 1980s building a very different model. Extractive reserves, protected forest, where local communities could sustainably harvest rubber, Brazil nuts, and other forest products indefinitely, without ever having to clear the trees that produced them. It was, in effect, an argument that standing forest could be made to pay for itself. Cattle ranchers who wanted his land felt otherwise. In December 1988, gunmen hired by a local rancher shot Mendez dead on his own back porch. His murder made international headlines, and, improbably, his idea won. Brazil now maintains dozens of extractive reserves, modeled directly on Mendez's original proposal, covering millions of hectares of standing forest, home to communities that harvest Brazil nuts, acai, and rubber for a living, rather than clear land for cattle. It is not a complete answer to the economics driving deforestation. It is, at best, a proof of concept, evidence that the ledger does not have to run in only one direction, even if, for the man who first insisted on that argument, the payment came in the form of 2 shotgun blasts on a Tuesday night. It is along the deep interior edge of the Amazon's arc of deforestation, in the most remote, least roaded pocket of forest still left in Rondônia, that this story now needs to slow down and focus on one single, small, unmarked patch of trees, and the one man who spent the final 26 years of his life defending it completely alone. Nobody ever learned his name, not his language, not the name of his people, not even, with certainty, what nation he belonged to. Brazilian officials first became aware of him in 1996, deep in a small forested pocket of Rondônia state, surrounded on every side by cattle ranches. Between the 1970s and early 1990s, his entire community had been wiped out, massacred, according to survivors and investigators, by ranchers and illegal miners clearing land for pasture. He was the last one left. For the next 26 years, he lived completely alone. He hunted, planted maize and cassava, built more than 50 straw huts across his small territory over the decades, and moved constantly, never staying anywhere long. In every home he abandoned, he dug a deep, narrow hole in the ground, more than 1.5 meters deep, in some cases lined with sharpened stakes. Nobody ever learned why. Some believed the holes were traps for game. Others thought they might have held some private, spiritual meaning known only to him. In 2009, gunmen attacked his shelter. He survived. He never once, in 26 years, allowed himself to be contacted. In August 2022, a government patrol found him dead in a hammock outside his hut, at an estimated age of 60, apparently of natural causes, with no sign of violence. He had covered his own body in macaw feathers before he died. A detail investigators believe suggests he knew the end was near and prepared for it in whatever way his people once marked death. That same year, 1,000 kilometers to the northwest, in the Javari Valley, 2 other people were killed for trying to protect people exactly like him: the journalist Dom Phillips and the indigenous Bruno Pereira, murdered for asking too many questions about who else was moving through the forest's most isolated corners. A researcher who had studied his territory for years said it plainly, and the sentence deserves to be repeated in full. With his death, the genocide of his people was complete. Nobody had killed him, but an entire nation of human beings had still, finally, ended, quietly, in a hammock, in a forest that did not stop growing around him even as he lay there. His land, barely 8,000 hectares, a small island of trees inside an ocean of cattle pasture, remains contested even now, claimed by farmers and defended by what is left of Brazil's indigenous rights institutions. His grave was reportedly disturbed not long after the burial. Nobody knows his name, but somewhere in that patch of forest, the holes he dug are still there, slowly filling with leaves, rain, and time. The only monument that will ever exist to a nation whose name we will also never learn. The Amazon was never empty, it was only unmapped. And in some corners it still is, because entire nations of people, right now, have made the same choice he made, to stay unmapped, on purpose, because the alternative has always, historically, been worse. He was not the last isolated person on Earth. He was simply the most documented one to disappear. Brazil's government today formally records more than 100 groups of isolated indigenous people living inside its borders. The current figure sits at roughly 124, according to the rights organization Survival International, which in 2025 published the first comprehensive global count of uncontacted peoples anywhere on Earth. It found evidence of 106 such groups across 10 countries, the overwhelming majority of them here, in the Amazon basin. The same report delivered a warning nobody wanted to hear. On current trends, researchers believe nearly half of the world's remaining uncontacted peoples could be wiped out within the next 10 years. Some of these groups are being seen, however briefly, for the first time in living memory. In January 2025, Brazil's Indigenous Affairs Agency released the first ever photographs of 9 men from an isolated group in the Manaus territory, captured on remote cameras, their faces visible, their arrows and traps documented, their presence confirmed after decades of only indirect evidence. A month later, in February 2025, a young man from a different isolated group walked, alone, into a riverside community on the Purus River, apparently asking for fire. He was calm, he was healthy. Nobody knew what had separated him from his people. By March 2025, government agents had located that group entirely. A family of 3, thinner than they should have been, stranded in flooded lowlands with too little food, and simply began camping near them, helping them fish and hunt without demanding contact in return. This is now, deliberately, official policy, and it has a specific author. In the 1980s, a Brazilian explorer named Sidney Possuelo, who would later head the country's Indigenous Affairs Agency, pushed through a doctrine that reversed a century of prior practice. Do not seek contact with isolated peoples at all, and instead build a ring of protection posts around whatever territory they already occupy. He had watched the older approach fail too many times. Groups that once numbered in the hundreds had been reduced to a handful of survivors within a year or two of first contact, killed not by bullets, but by the common cold, influenza, and diseases their bodies had never had to fight before. His answer was to stop trying to find isolated peoples entirely and start trying, simply, to keep everyone else out. Since the 1980s, Brazil's Indigenous Affairs Agency has operated on exactly that principle, that the kindest thing the modern world can do for the most vulnerable nations left on Earth is leave them alone and simply try to keep the land around them intact. Whether that principle survives another generation depends on something more basic than any single crisis described so far in this story. Whether there is still a forest left standing for anyone to hide inside in the first place. Is the Amazon, on balance, actually getting better, or is the damage simply moving to wherever the cameras and the enforcement have not yet reached? By the numbers Brazil released at the start of this year, the honest answer is both, at once, in the same 12 months. Deforestation in the Brazilian Amazon has fallen for 3 consecutive years running, and by early 2026, government satellite data showed forest clearing at its lowest level for that period since monitoring began in 2014. Independent monitors largely confirm the trend. Brazil's Environment Minister, Marina Silva, said this year that if the current pace holds, 2026 could mark the lowest annual deforestation rate ever recorded in the Amazon, going back to when record-keeping started in 1988. That is the good number. Here is the one sitting right beside it. Even as bulldozed, clear-cut land shrank, wildfires across the Amazon basin rose by roughly a third in the first months of 2026, compared with the year before. In 2024, an exceptional drought, the region's worst in decades, combined with record heat to strip nearly 2.8 million hectares of primary forest, roughly 60% of it lost to fire rather than the chainsaw. Deforestation, in other words, is no longer the whole story of how this forest disappears. Degraded, thinned, and drought-stressed forest is now catching fire on its own, in patterns no bulldozer ever created. Ecologists who study these fires describe a landscape unlike the healthy rainforest it used to be. A thinner canopy, letting in direct sunlight for the first time in centuries, drier leaf litter piling up on a forest floor, built to stay permanently damp, invasive grasses creeping in along the burned edges, priming the same ground to burn again, faster and hotter, the next time a dry season runs long. One state illustrates the split perfectly. While deforestation fell nearly everywhere else in the Amazon this year, Roraima, in the far north, bordering Venezuela and Guyana, saw it rise by 21%, driven by a drier local climate and a single municipality, Caracaraí, that recorded more forest clearing than anywhere else in the country and remains under federal investigation for suspected illegal, deliberately set fires. Enforcement can close one door. It rarely closes all of them at once. So which number is the true state of the Amazon in 2026? The one going down or the one going up? Scientists who have spent their careers studying this exact question say the honest answer is that both numbers are, in the end, measuring the same underlying danger from 2 different directions. None of this is only Brazil's story to tell. Even if Brazil holds nearly 2/3 of the forest, and therefore most of the headlines, researchers monitoring the wider basin have identified early signs of the same drying, thinning, and savanna-like transition in neighboring Bolivia, where cattle expansion and fire have converted large stretches of forest at a pace that, proportionally, has occasionally outrun even Brazil's. Ecuador, Colombia, and Peru show smaller but comparable warning signs of their own. The tipping point Brazilian scientists worry about most is not, in the end, a national problem. It is a basin-wide one, moving at slightly different speeds in 9 different countries, each with its own election calendar and its own capacity, or lack of it, to hold a policy in place for longer than a single administration. That last part matters more than it might seem. Brazil holds a presidential election later this year, and independent polling has suggested a genuinely uncertain outcome. Whichever administration takes office in 2027 will inherit either the lowest annual deforestation rate on record or the political conditions to reverse it entirely within a single term, exactly as happened once before, between 2019 and 2022. Nothing achieved in the Amazon over the past 3 years is written into anything more permanent than a policy that the next election could undo. For more than 4 decades, a Brazilian climate scientist named Carlos Nobre has studied what happens to a rainforest when you remove too much of it. In 1990, he published research warning that clearing enough of the Amazon would not simply shrink the forest, it would permanently change the regional climate, turning what remained drier, hotter, and increasingly savanna-like. Working alongside the American ecologist Thomas Lovejoy, Nobre later refined that warning into a specific number. Once combined deforestation and severe degradation cross somewhere between 20 and 25% of the original forest, the Amazon's self-generated rainfall system could begin to collapse on its own, independent of any further human cutting, a one-way threshold scientists call the tipping point. By the most recent comprehensive assessment, roughly 26% of the Amazon's forest area already shows some combination of deforestation and severe degradation, meaning that, by this measure, parts of the eastern and southern Amazon may already be past the point Nobre first warned about 36 years ago. Some of his more recent findings are, if anything, more unsettling than the headline threshold. Sections of the southeastern Amazon, Nobre's research suggests, have already stopped absorbing more carbon than they release, meaning parts of what the world has always called the lungs of the planet may now, in places, be exhaling more than they inhale. The dry season itself is already changing shape. Across much of the southern Amazon, what used to be a predictable 3 to 4 month dry stretch each year now regularly runs 4 to 5 months, with 20 to 30% less rainfall during it, and average temperatures 2 to 3 degrees Celsius higher than a generation ago. Nobre has said publicly that 6 months is the number that worries him most. Cross that threshold, and the region's climate envelope shifts permanently from rainforest towards something closer to savanna, with or without another tree ever being cut. Should the wider tipping point be crossed, Nobre estimates that as much as 70% of the forest could shift toward a degraded, open canopy, savanna-like state within 30 to 50 years, releasing an estimated 300 billion tons of carbon dioxide in the process, an amount that would make the international climate targets agreed in Paris essentially unreachable. In November 2025, for the first time in 3 decades of United Nations climate negotiations, the World's Climate Summit was finally held inside the Amazon itself, in the city of Belém, at the river's mouth. It was meant to be the moment the science and the politics finally lined up. It mostly wasn't. Negotiators left Belém with a new forest finance fund, worth a promised $125 billion, and a voluntary pledge, backed by dozens of countries but not a binding one, to eventually produce an actual roadmap to end deforestation, deferred, for now, to the next summit, a year and a country away. The logic behind that new fund is, in its own way, a distant echo of Chico Mendes's original argument in The Extractive Reserves of Acre, that standing forest should be worth more, in hard financial terms, than cleared land. The Tropical Forest Forever facility is designed to pay countries an annual return for every hectare of tropical forest they keep intact, funded by investors rather than taxpayers, and open in principle to more than 70 forest nations, not just Brazil. Whether it can actually raise the sums promised, and whether the payments would meaningfully compete with the price of cattle pasture, or gold, remains, as of this year, entirely unproven. Indigenous delegates, several thousand of whom attended in person, marched through the conference venue, demanding a firmer outcome than they got. A separate fire, unrelated to any forest, briefly forced an evacuation of part of the summit itself, an image several journalists in attendance found difficult not to read as symbolic. Belém itself, a river port city of roughly 1.5 million people at the mouth of the Amazon, spent years preparing for the summit, building new hotels and transit infrastructure through neighborhoods that had waited decades for investment. Climate finance was never quite able to justify on its own. For 2 weeks in November, the world's climate diplomacy was finally, literally, standing in the river's floodplain. Whether that proximity changed anything beyond the optics is, like almost everything else in this story, still being argued over. Is that enough? Nobody studying this seriously believes anyone can say for certain yet. Nobre's own science suggests the honest answer sits somewhere between two things that are both true at once. The Amazon has already survived closer to the edge than almost anyone expected 10 years ago, and it has never, in recorded history, had less room left for anyone's mistakes. So return, one final time, to that small, unmarked patch of forest in Rondônia, barely 8,000 hectares, surrounded on every side by cattle pasture, guarded now by almost nobody, remembered by almost nobody, named by almost nobody, because there was never anybody left alive who knew its name to give. Somewhere in there, the holes a nameless man spent 26 years digging are still in the ground. Nobody has filled them in. The forest is doing that slowly, on its own schedule, the way it has always erased and regrown everything that has ever happened to it. The pre-Columbian orchards, the rubber barons' mansions, Henry Ford's clapboard houses, the massacre sites nobody officially recorded. Rain falls into those holes, leaves settle, roots find their way back down into ground that, for a little while, briefly, held the entire physical memory of a human nation that will now never be recovered by anyone, in any language, ever again. This has always been the Amazon's real subject, underneath the river statistics and the deforestation charts. Not nature versus humanity, but memory versus forgetting, on a scale almost too large to hold in a single mind. Every empire that has tried to write its name across this basin, the rubber barons, the dictatorship's highway engineers, Henry Ford's utopian planners, the garimperos with their mercury, the men who killed Dom Phillips and Bruno Pereira for knowing too much about a fishing operation, every single one of them believed, at the time, that they were the ones finishing the map. The forest has outlasted every one of their maps so far. Consider, one more time, everything this forest has absorbed and outlasted without ever fully surrendering. A war fought over 78 kilometers of unsurveyed mountain ridge. An opera house built on stolen labor, still standing. A rubber empire that spent $20 million and could not force a single tree to grow the way it was told to. A dictatorship's highway, meant to conquer the interior, that instead produced a permanent scar visible from space. A murdered union organizer whose idea, decades later, quietly outlived the men who killed him. 2 journalists killed for asking the wrong questions about a fishing operation, whose unfinished book was completed anyway by the people who knew them best. None of it settled anything permanently. All of it left a mark that is, in one form or another, still there. The Amazon was never empty. It was only unmapped. Perhaps that is the only honest way left to describe the largest wilderness remaining on Earth. Not a place waiting to be discovered, explained, or saved by anyone standing outside it, but a live, ongoing argument between memory and erasure that has been running for 400 years and has not, yet, been decided either way. 9 countries, thousands of nations, one river breathing in and out twice a year, and, right now, tonight, in some unmarked pocket of forest, no satellite has properly resolved. Quite possibly still, somewhere, someone who has never once been found. The map was never finished. It is entirely possible that it never will be, and somewhere in the deep shade of the world's largest forest, that unfinished quality might be the one thing left standing between the Amazon and everyone who has ever wanted to close the book on it for good. If this journey moved you, consider subscribing. There is always more of the map left to walk. See you on the next